Hello, Paul English. Welcome back to Wise Women Weekdays. How are you? It's been a long, long time.
Nice to be back, Karen. I'm not too bad. I've had, as you know, a few little major things to deal with, but overall, I'm pretty good. The weather, I'm always talking about the weather in my show, but the weather has been ridiculously good. I know it's a little bit grey and scudding clouds today, more in keeping, I guess, with the time of year. But overall, it's been amazing,
Amazing.
really. The last
It
few
has.
weeks have been amazing because it's quite a few weeks since we last had a chat, isn't it? So
It
that,
is. It is because
yeah.
you've gone through some interesting, quite emotional ups and downs. I've been ill again, second time this year. So yeah. So we have met a couple of times in the pub with the group, but we haven't had one of these chats. So I've missed you, Paul. All your words
I've
of
missed you
wisdom.
too, Karen.
You.
I have. I've
Lovely
missed you
to be
too. It's
back.
great.
Bless you. So, well, we were chatting. We've already chatted off record for about an hour, from dentistry to loss of people and children. We've talked about loads of stuff already. And I said, "Look, we better press the record button. And what should we talk about?" So we've gone for Victory in Europe Day, haven't we? VE Day, because that's imminent. I think it's is it has it gone? It's gone, hasn't it? It was yesterday.
Well,
It mustn't.
they did a big doodah yesterday. I wasn't aware that they were going to do one of those things, but I guess that must have been because it was Bank Holiday
Bank
Monday,
holiday.
so everybody had the day off, didn't they?
Right. But the actual
Um,
day is the 8th, is it? It's Thursday?
yes, it was the 8th of May when it was all officially ended, courtesy of the signing of papers, unconditional surrender by the German High Command, was back on the 8th of May 1945. And as some people here know, I have a show on Thursdays, which just happens this time to be the 8th of May. So we'll be covering this as well in a different sort of way. But I think it's very appropriate because just in terms of watching the news and how they're covering it, I guess it's atypical. We've probably all familiar with the way that they cover these events over here. And you have to say, from a sort of pageantry and organisation point of view, it's one thing that the country still does very well. Even though I didn't watch much of it, they got the usual flyover, I think, of Lancaster bombers and Spitfires and that kind of stuff going over Buckingham Palace, I think it was, with the royal family in attendance and all that kind of stuff. But overall, the sort of response, I think, from people was one of buoyancy. At least it gave them something positive to think about. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not here to be a
No,
permanent cynic
no.
about all things, even though the underlying story is not, I would suggest, exactly what people think it is. But the cessation of hostilities at any time is always a good thing. Um, and yet here we are 80 years on after that event, victory in Europe. And of course, I do tend to think it begs the question, what is it that we thought we were actually victorious about? What is it that we won? And maybe most people casting an eye about England and the United Kingdom as a whole are hard pressed to find good answers to that because it doesn't look as though we won much. And that's really what's been running through my head the last few days. I've noticed that the Churchill speech at the time has been played quite a few times. It's only about 3 minutes long. He made that on the radio, or pre-recorded it anyway, on the 8th of May. And there were several other speeches that were made around that time, maybe the same day, one addressing a crowd, I believe, in Trafalgar Square or something like that, which were all of a similar sentiment. And the relief of the nation at the time was off the charts, and people were very, very happy that it had ended. But I suspect most of them, in fact, I heard somebody call in today. Was it today? I think it was. You know, Mike Graham, who does the show on talk radio.
Yep,
It's a very
yep.
I'm finding it really engaging, actually. He's from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. I caught nearly all of it this morning because I woke up early and I had my phone by me and I just tuned into the station. I was just listening as I sort of came to consciousness. And there were some very interesting calls in about this topic today. Most people were very happy to celebrate things in the conventional way, but there was a couple of chaps, one in particular, who called in and said, and this is probably not an idea that people have not heard before, but it was great that he had the courage to say it. Particularly, he's kind of going against the flow. And what he said was, he said, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said along the lines, he said, all the men and women that fought in that conflict, he said, I think many of them would be hard pressed to know just what it was they fought for if they were able to see the country as it now stands. And although obviously people's attention is naturally on the events of 80 years ago, it's the intervening 80 years that's the really important factor, I think. You know, by their fruits shall ye know them. And we have to look around and say, what fruits did we acquire then from this apparently amazing victory over Germany in 1945? And it begs a lot of questions.
It does indeed. I mean, when you talk about V-Day and celebrations of end of things like that, or like royal family weddings, or big occasions that I think the UK is very good at having, I just think of street parties and people coming out together. If you live in a street that you know all your neighbours, I don't know. I've lived in this new place for 8 months. I don't know any of my neighbours,
Yeah.
because that's quite often, it seems to be the way these days. You don't always know your neighbours unless you've lived there for a very long time. But street parties are really important, and I didn't really I haven't observed, because I don't watch the telly, I don't read the papers. It comes, this information does come through other groups and chatting to people of a like mind. But
Yeah.
I have seen the bunting up, and I thought, what's that? And then you ask somebody. But it wasn't a big thing for me until we just started chatting, saying, what should we talk about? And I think it is a very big thing to discuss, because although these celebrations do bring the community together, they don't know, as you actually said at the beginning, they know what they are celebrating? What is it that we have won? It's an illusion, isn't it? It's an illusion, because some people actually say we haven't won the war, the Allies. The war has been won by those that we were fighting. Who knows?
Hmm.
Because I mean, I'm not going to say too much. What you carry on, because this is your information I'm trying to get out. I've got my own opinions, but I want to hear from you.
Well, it's understandable, I think, why people would feel that, for example, what Churchill said was pretty true and accurate.
Mm.
And the reason it's understandable is that for most people, for most of their lives, they've only really received one side of the story. There's nothing new in me making that sort of an observation. You could say that about so many periods of history. In fact, all the way up and down the line, we rarely, if ever, get to see or are even aware that the other side may have a history worth listening to, because they're always the bad guys, right? And we're always the good guys. And, pretty much this is what Churchill was saying in his speech. But he was, how can I phrase this? This is going to sound churlish and almost, I guess, even traitorous to some ears. He was more than economical with the truth in this 3-minute speech. For example, one of the things he mentions is he talks about Germany's unbridled, I don't know if that's the word he used, but their aggression towards Poland. So in the normal historical record, the story goes that Germany, keen for revenge from World War One, that is understandable, by the way, because of the way that they were stitched up in World War One, and nobody in England would have responded any differently if the shoe had been on the other foot. But what is not mentioned is that, and what he failed to mention then, even though it would have probably been in everybody's recent living memory, is that in 1939, France and Britain effectively bigged up Poland. They went to Poland and they said, look, if he gets all uppity and starts giving, if Mr. Hitler and National Socialist Germany start to give you some grief, we will help you. And so the Poles were emboldened by this. When push came to shove, the British and the French provided no help at all. None. Now, why did Germany invade Poland? The normal narrative says because they were an aggressive, expansive empire that wanted to take over the world. That's kind of the comic book story that we're given. But the actual reason, in terms of real world events, is that for several months over the late summer and early autumn through to September of that year, before they finally went in, Polish forces and mercenaries and that kind of groupings of people, communists in many ways, all sorts of people, had been killing Germans in huge numbers. And when I say Germans, I don't mean troops, I mean German farming families in this part of the world. There is a particular massacre called the Bromberg, Bromberg, the Bromberg massacre. And if anybody wants to go and look it up, I would advise them to do so, to try and find a decent report of it. They do exist, although by now on the internet, many of these things have been removed. if you come across any of the photographs of the killings, you won't feel good, even though they're even in black and white. We're talking about horrifically violent ways of killing people. Horrific, nailing to doors, sawing them in half. It's off the charts, right? You just go, what? It's mad. It was like some sort of terrible, hellish thing was unleashed on these German people. Tensions, of course, had been whipped up intentionally. And in fact, there's a good argument to be made that this was all by design to create the reason to declare war on Germany. In other words, let's create a spot of great agitation and effectively attack Germany in such a way that they can do nothing else but defend their people. And so that's really what happened. The Germans stayed their hand for a while, but it's as if you and I were to find out, for example, it's hard to come up with a straight analogy. Let's suppose for some reason that some other nation had arrived in Cornwall and we find out they were slaughtering all the Cornish farmers. What would we be expected to do? You know, Cornwall, I'm selecting Cornwall because the people of Cornwall, rightfully and goodly in my mind, think of themselves as slightly different to the rest of England. And I love that. I think they should. Just like I like all of England to think of itself as being uniquely different, even though we know it's not necessarily so much the case these days. But we would not be happy about that. We would have to take action to defend those people. Well, that's basically what happened there. This was then framed in the Western press as being obviously a sign that everything they'd said about Hitler in terms of, whipping up antagonism towards Germany was true. And therefore, we declared war. Germany did not declare war on Britain. Most people forget this. It did not seek a war with Britain at all. And in fact, there are, I may have mentioned it before in one of our recent chats or other chats, I think at the Kew Gardens, I think is where they keep a lot of the records from this period and probably other periods as well. I think there's a big records office there. I'm sorry for being so vague, but I think it's Kew Gardens somewhere. And in there are 37 letters of peace offerings made by National Socialist Germany to Britain prior to the onset of hostilities. The intention was to never have a war with Britain. This becomes obvious the more of these documents you read from the other side. All of those peace offerings were intercepted by Churchill's agents, and the British public were denied knowledge of them to get you into a war mood, to get the people of the day into a war mood, a mood that they were naturally not in because many of them had strong recent memories of the hell that was World War I. And they did not want another conflict with Germany. So, because it turned out bad. It was awful. Huge swathes of men from villages all across England, because in the early days, they built the platoons, as it were, or the divisions in World War I out of men from the same village. So when they got wiped out, all the men of one village would be wiped out. They realized this was an error. This was in the early days of it. There are certain stories, I think, of villages in England where the bell being tolled for the dead at the church didn't stop ringing for like 10 days straight for all the men because they'd all been wiped out in one attack and they were all in like a village squadron or whatever. So they changed that after a while. But it hurt people in the home, very much so. And I think even the letters columns, not that I've got any in front of me, but the letters column to the Times newspaper, 1936, 37, when rumors, all of this was being whipped up, were strongly against it and broadly in support of peace with Germany at any cost. And the people, of course, were right to want this, in my view. The narrative that we get today is, no, he had to be stopped because he was a maniac and Germany wanted to attack the world. Basically, in my view, the Germans were fighting a defensive war against unbridled aggression from a ring of enemies, from Russia in the east to what then became France and Britain in the west. And then America stepped in. So you have to sort of step back almost like with a telescope and look at it from a distance and go, what's really going on? If I can remove the newspaper reports from Britain from my head, and it's very difficult, I understand that, can I actually see what was really going on? I'm not trying to paint out the Germans as saints. That's not what I'm saying. War produces terrible behavior on all sides. But if you look at it as calmly as you can, you would have to say that Germany, broadly speaking, was seeking to defend what it had built and wanted no war with us. Another sign of that is that everybody will be aware of Rudolf Hess flying over here, completely unbeknownst to Hitler and the rest of the high command. They were shocked when this happened, by the way. They were absolutely mortified. They thought it was completely mad. But Hess's determination for peace with Britain was considerable, so much so that he put his own life at risk. I mean, he ended up dying in Spandau years later under very dubious circumstances. He came over with a peace offering. They couldn't let that be known to the Britons either. So Churchill, in my mind, far from being the hero that saved these islands, is the man that plunged these islands into a wholly unnecessary war. Now, other critics would rightly say, yeah, but if we hadn't done it then, we would have had to do it later or whatever. So be it. I understand that you can spin these things on for a long time. But if we go back to this thing, by their fruits ye know them, what is it that we actually achieved by supposedly defeating Germany? What actually occurred was that we allowed communism to move right into the heartland of Europe, where it now sits, I would suggest, in the form of the European Union. I view it as a communist enterprise. We've got all these sort of supranational non-governmental organizations telling everybody what to do, all for our own good, of course, because they know better. And you'd have to say that the character and culture of these British islands has been warped to buggery by all of this, so that most people now floating around today are kind of rudderless in a space that used to be so well defined, so joyful in many ways. It had its own vitality and its own creativity, much of which is being gradually erased from out of our day-to-day living. That's one of the things that I see. I see the absence of things that were really fabulous with this nation in the past. And I know you could say, well, Paul, you're just viewing all these things through rose-tinted spectacles. Yes, I am. I think it's worth putting them on every now and again. It gives you a positive view of stuff. I know it wasn't all wonderful and lovely and marvelous all the time. I'm not that silly. But the slaughtering of so many men and the fighting of these battles and the destruction of so many beautiful cities and the architecture in those cities, and the wanton destruction of women and children, courtesy of bombing raids, is an appalling legacy. It's appalling. It's a terrible, terrible conflict. These things are kind of airbrushed out of history, and right now, of course, we are supposedly celebrating what happened with the end of it, and it is worth celebrating. But really, we're celebrating a conflict that should never have begun in the first place. And that's,
So who benefits from war ultimately?
Well, I know this is going to sound trite and a common thing from me, but I'm going to say that the bankers are the ones that benefit from war. Whenever they start to lose control, the next thing they do is they start a war. And if you view many of the wars through that lens, it's not exactly that in every case, but it's mainly that. You will find the money power embedded in raising up the spirits of nations to go to war. And this is because of the ability to divide and conquer Europe. It's a strange sort of thing. You know, we've been led to believe that the French are our enemies. Well, of course, the history between England and France is one of historically far more conflict than it ever was between England and Germany. In fact, prior to 1914, we'd never had a war with Germany. And then from 1914 to 1945, a period of 30 years, were involved in a great slaughtering of one another, even to the extent basically that far, far more Germans died during these conflicts than did Britain. And that the roots of it lie very much in trade wars, yet again, money, commercial aggression, from the early 1900s, actually, which was the grounding for the arrival of World War I. Germany was becoming far more industrially effective. We obviously had led the way here with the Industrial Revolution and had been king of the heap for a long time. And I suspect, and certainly certain records seem to indicate, that the money power, as I call it, in the city of London, were aware of this growing industrial might of Germany and didn't like it too much. They didn't like it. And it was causing them all sorts of, they were having to work a bit harder to maintain their king of the heap position. And they actually decided consciously to have a war with Germany, probably about 1906. There are certain reports from, I think it's the American ambassador with Lord Grey at the time, And it went something like, why don't you just, he said, the American ambassador said something to the lines of, well, why don't you just, keep improving your industry and outcompete them? And they said, no, we would prefer a war. And this is also supported by one of the comments from Churchill, probably during the war or just after it. And I'm paraphrasing from memory. He said, this war, he said, is not against Hitler or National Socialism. It's against the might of the German people as a whole, which has to be crushed. In other words, it was this concern and anxiety about the industrious, capable German people beginning to dominate world markets, which they felt entitled were permanently theirs. And you can't do that. We own all this stuff, and we're not having you turn up and taking all our money away, all our power away. We don't want it. I suspect strongly that that was a great force within our so-called ruling elite. And they were quite happy then to commit tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of British lives and the lives of Australians and New Zealanders, and etc., into a conflict which they were never going to get killed by, but the common working man was going to get slaughtered by in huge numbers. They didn't care. We shouldn't necessarily be surprised by that, but that's that view. And there's another. What was the other thing as well? There's a thing that Churchill said to Lord Boothby. Do you remember him, Lord Boothby? He lived
Boothby,
right
yes,
through
you've
into this.
mentioned
Yeah,
him
he was
before.
he was pals with the Cray twins of all people at some point. Boothby was probably, not batting on a straight wicket, let's put it that way. And Boothby was, he said to Boothby in a letter, he said, Germany's great mistake was to deny international finance its share of the profits. And he's, of course, no one's quoting this week, but Churchill, in his own words, has said exactly these things. And this really backs up, what we were suggesting, that because Germany had removed itself from the world financial system, it was kind of compelled to in the 30s because of the attacks that came upon it, and had thrived in spite of the sort of embargoes on its ability to trade. It got stronger because of it. It was seen as a massive threat to the globalist usury money power, because they were doing it without really employing usury in the way that we do. And I think I've mentioned here before, whenever any leader, not just Hitler, but other leaders, put the economic bounty of its own nation at the disposal of its own people first, they get warred upon, because this makes all the other leaders who are basically parasitizing off the back of their people look bad. They look very bad. And I think that's the primary driver in many of these things. There are lots of others as well. And you're going to get huge books. There's been more books written about Hitler and Napoleon, I think, than any other people in history, purely because if you look at them, what have they got in common? They were both doing something for their own nation. And in both cases, it opposed quite directly the ongoing buildup of power by the international banksters. And that's part of it. So if we were to look back on what we're celebrating, if I was to take a very cynical view, which unfortunately I'm forced to, I'm afraid, with this, it's that the British and their allies were drawn into a war that didn't need to be fought against an enemy that didn't want to fight them, so that a bunch of bankers could maintain their financial grip and control over Britain and elsewhere without having a rival in Germany upsetting their precious apple cart. We were deceived into fighting effectively our Saxon brothers. We are Anglo-Saxons, many of us here of descent, for no damn good reason whatsoever. Certainly not for us. And I think this guy's comment, as I said on the radio, when he said most of them would wonder what they fought for, they would. They would. They would absolutely. What did we fight for? I mean, if we look at the way England is right now, tragically, this is what they fought for. They fought for all these terrible problems that we've got
I
right
mean,
now.
that's the point I was going to make. The young men and now women, I believe, I don't know what age it is that they're called out, 18 to 25. I guess that's a good fighting age, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they've been lied to then, because they're told, whether it's our country or America or Russia or Ukraine, they're being told, fight for your country, fight for independence, fight for freedom, and that isn't quite the case? Are they being lied to?
I think so. Yeah. I think it's an easy lie for people in power to tell, because people do want to defend their nation. They know that there is a natural spirit of nationhood amongst people because it is the natural state of affairs. And nearly all the wars that have occurred between nations, particularly over the last 400 or 500 years in Europe, have been, I would suggest, in great part, brought about by the dangerous power of banks. It's a very
Follow the
dangerous
money.
power. Yeah, and most politicians cannot and will not talk about it because they are controlled by that power to this very day, which is why we are not going to see, unless there is a colossal sea change or some spectacular, almost miraculous event in human consciousness, we're not going to see this come to an end because people still think that governments are there to sort out our economic problems. They're actually the cause of them. That there is all the solutions exist and have existed, and many of them have been tried in the field and proven to work far, far better than the system that we currently live under. So in a way, what World War II did was it extends and maintains the control of central bankers over the affairs of the nations. And that's exactly what it achieved. And of course, the people in London were quite happy about this because the City of London is the epicenter or the developing point for central bank systems worldwide and has been instrumental in doing all that. And I don't class those people as being British or English or what. I don't care where they come from. I just know that they live here, apparently, or they sit here. This power center sits here in the City of London and is responsible for so much conflict in the world, for which British people have been roped into it because, as you well know, Karen, we got the British Empire. That was great, wasn't it? Wasn't that great? Except if you were a carpenter from Coventry or whatever, you were probably getting your head shot off or shooting some other poor bugger's head off in the middle of nowhere. And when you came back, your wife didn't have much to eat. So things really don't change. This dismissal of the working man by the people who are apparently in control in World War II, you've got a prime example of that. It's so you can see why I'm not on the BBC talking about things.
I can indeed. I can indeed. Do you think there's anything? I'm trying to be mindful of my words here, but is it a ritual war? You know, some people
I
say,
think it could be. Yeah.
Because
Like a blood
all the
sacrifice,
energy.
you mean?
Yes,
Yes.
I do, and it's an energy thing, isn't it? It's not just the young men and women and the children and whoever's killed in the war, but those soldiers that are fighting. But it's the aftermath, isn't it? It's the whole lot, the pain, the suffering, and going back to VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. What exactly is it that we're celebrating? The end of a ritual, but people have no idea really that it is. In my opinion, it is a kind of ritual because it's feeding those that should not be fed. The powers that be, the powers that should not be. When we talk about heaven and hell on earth, I think a lot of people are living in hell on earth, and I think this contributes to it. So it is a ritual in my mind.
I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that's the case. Yes, they're canny with their dates and all that kind of stuff. And the amount of death in World War II is astronomical. I mean, it's off the charts. It's huge numbers of people, which you sort of got 95 million. You go, oh, 95 million. It's just a huge number. It doesn't mean anything. But it's a lot of deaths under really terrible and awful circumstances. People departing this world under very violent and awful conditions for no good reason whatsoever. The people in Russia, I feel, are very conflicted. This is just my take. They lost so many men, did the Russians. Huge numbers. But this is because Russia was not controlled by Russians. This is because the Russian Revolution was not Russian. It's the same communist bankster force that brought about communism in Russia that was quite happy to commit huge numbers of Ivans, as the Germans called them, against the Germans. And they were shot at either by the Germans at the front or they were shot at from the back by the equivalent of the KGB. It wasn't the KGB at the time. I forgot the name of it. NKVD agents were placed in the Russian army. And if you retreat, you got shot by them. Nice.
You're sandwiched.
Lovely. I'm fighting for my country. If I don't go forward, I might get shot. But if I go back, I'm definitely going to get killed by apparently my own people. But they weren't. They had a disconnect. And these things, these details mount up to create I think, a clearer picture. It still leaves an awful lot of questions, and I wouldn't necessarily expect that we come up with the perfect answer to all this kind of stuff. But even if people don't agree with it, I think it's useful to apply the context and see what you come up with, that Germany was effectively fighting a defensive war because it had to, because it was earmarked for removal, because its economic system runs counter to the usury system that comes out of London and elsewhere and Wall Street. It's against that. And it works. It works so spectacularly well that when other countries see it, or their people become aware of it, and they make sure that the people don't become aware of it, the people naturally want it because it's right living. It's much closer. It's not perfect, but it's got far less errors in it than the one that we have right now. So it removes the target market for the bankers. It's effectively a parasitical industry, and it needs a host on which to feed. And that host is the dumb, stupid peasant. And I'm one of them. Hopefully less dumb than I used to be, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And that's and it keeps us that way. And I think many of these things are organized in a way between the leaders, so that they can each maintain power over their people. And then they spin stories from the court historians to tell you what a great war you fought. And yes, I know you lost all your sons in this war, but it was worth it, wasn't it, for the country?
For the
Not
country,
really, no.
fighting.
No, it wasn't actually.
And for freedom. That's, fighting for freedom. You hear a lot in recent years when, people have been sort of trying to fight the system, and they're saying because our ancestors, my grandfather or whatever, they were in the war, they were fighting for freedom. And look at the state in which our country is in at the moment. Talk about freedom. You can't walk down the street without being cameraed about 10 times. That's hardly free, is it? It's horrendous. But also going on about when you were saying the Russians, the Ivans, they were sandwiched between either the front line or, their own buddies that are going to shoot them for cowardice. We had the same thing, didn't we? If people, I guess, is it the First World War and the Second World War, that were running from the trenches, definitely the First World War, they would be shot for cowardice. And we didn't know about, a post-traumatic stress disorder. That wasn't something that was talked about. But I guess we've moved on a little bit now because we realise that there is that when you're in a war. It doesn't help because you've still got to go through the war and get the PTSD, and then you come out of it. But the fact that you're shooting your own men because they didn't want to stand and be shot, doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. But then to me, war isn't right. None of it is right.
No, it's a terrible thing. Because in nearly all cases, it's completely avoidable. Unfortunately, the governance of nations appears to not be avoidable, and it nearly always goes wrong. If you're thinking of a way to actually wipe out generations of men and therefore be able to affect the culture of a nation when many of them don't come back, war's a great way to do that, isn't it? What a great way.
It is.
All those troublesome working class types with their beer and their rather, disrespectful attitude to Lord this and Lady that. We don't want that around. Let's just have them killed. Let's organize a war. Listen, I'm not saying it was exactly like that, but these threads occurred to me. You could see them having a conversation over 35 bottles of Chablis or whatever they have, because they're in a different world. Their worldview is fundamentally different about what's important in life. And what's important is that they stay in charge of it, and that we become sort of collateral damage in their little game to look good and to be good, or whatever they think they're doing.
There is that thing, isn't there, on the Georgia Guidestones that have been knocked down over the last couple of years. That there is this statement that they whoever they might be, only what was it, half 500 million people to run the world or something. And the rest of us, be gone. And whether it's a war, or whether it's an illness, whether it's a bug, a killer bug that comes along to wipe us out, because also they're going to replace us with other things, aren't they? AI and robots and stuff like that. So they don't need us with our own opinions, our own free thinking, critical thinking, our own minds, our own independence. So be gone, off with their head.
No, I think, Karen, they must see that as a threat. I mean, creativity is an amazing thing, but they don't want too much of it. Or if it's coming along, they want to be in control of it once it's been filed at the patent office and stuff like that. I mean, I think most of the technical and pragmatic problems of being alive, on a physical level, have been solved a long time ago. It's just that we
Yes.
can't get access to the solutions because someone can't make money out of it. It seems really simplistic, but as a thread, it seems to pop up all over the place. It's a bit like, the whole of the so-called medical industry is not based on cure, it's based on permanent treatment. You can't make money if you cure people. They're not a patient anymore. You
No.
don't have anything left to sell them. So people are obsessed with selling things because they want to make money. So the
Mm,
focus, the consciousness is on money. And
mm,
whether people know it or not, inadvertently, people are being coerced and shuffled into the temple of Mammon and not spending enough time in the temple of God, metaphorically
yeah.
speaking. And where our hearts are with God, our minds are easily seduced by other things. And I guess it's an internal fight that we all have. We all have it throughout our lives. You think about yourself, whereas in fact, this is just my take on it. If I look back at nearly all the happiest times I've ever had, it's always when I'm with other people and you are doing your best to be of good value to those that you're with. Always, however it is, like holding your tongue when somebody says something that you violently disagree with because it wouldn't help out too much at that moment in time. There are all of these things, masses of details about how we operate and behave. But the context is we would like to behave well with one another. And war is the worst level of behavior human beings can be plunged into. It's absolutely diabolically bad, and no good cometh of it. I can't see much good coming. They always make out that it is. And is it not it's about context, like you were saying earlier. People are sold on this idea, we must defend the nation against the evil aggressor. What they don't tell you is that they've been part and parcel of building that evil aggressor to get you out of the picture a bit. I think, people may say, well, this is far too cynical and far too conspiratorial, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this is the case. And I don't think you can ignore it.
I don't think you can, and it's cyclical. It goes on and on and on in different cycles. I'm reading a novel by Kate Moss called The Labyrinth at the moment. I think I'm a bit late to the party. I think it's been out there for some time, but that
All
goes
right.
back, I think, to the 12th century, and they're talking about wars. It's bringing in religion, the Catholic Church and the Cathars and what have you, but it's
Yeah.
talking about wars and using religion. In this instance, it's religion, which is also linked to money, but that's like 800-900 years ago, and they're going through the same emotions that we are going every century. Or there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, how many wars are going on at the moment? There's loads of them. Maybe it's not in Europe, it's on the verge of, isn't it? And
Mm-hmm.
with all the other larger countries that are on the verge of, with threats of this, that, and the other, I think there's a little fear mongering that goes on as well with it, saying they're going to, drop the bomb, press the button and drop the bomb. Because I grew up with not the fear, but they were trying to put the fear of the nuclear bomb in our brains, because they would have conversations at school. What would you do if they drop the bomb? You go under the table, miss, kind of things like that. So there's always these elements of creating fear, because a certain entities on this planet, going back to rituals, thrive on fear. And when you have a public that are in fear, you control them. And who do we go to? We go to authority, don't we? As a nation, we go to the government, we go to the people that are supposed to be looking after us to help us if we're in fear. So
Yep. We've been trained to do that.
yeah.
The authorities will, even now, if you look at what passes for newspaper reporting, say with regards to the delightful and hilarious and tragic political situation that we have here, where we are being supposedly governed by probably the most mediocre people you're ever likely to meet in your life, let alone in politics.
That's polite. You're being
It
very
is.
polite,
I am being
mediocre.
very diplomatic. I could use vulgar barroom language, but I thought this is a family show, right?
Yeah.
So, but we're going to run out of adjectives to describe how poor they are. And they're unreachable in communication. And there's nothing new with this, but we seem to be in an excessive period of the most rank. You see, I don't think it's stupid. It is stupidity, which in a way is scarier than being evil, because stupid people are not aware that they're being stupid. And if you look at the way that these political people communicate, they communicate to me as people who literally cannot hear criticism. They can't allow it into their space. It's going to undermine their worldview, because they're all in the process, hopefully as quickly as we can, of understanding that their worldview is completely mistaken. It's totally mistaken. All of these ideologies that we've seen since World War II, diversity is our strength, for example, these glib phrases. Diversity has never been a strength in anything. You never diversify your forces, you weaken them.
Yeah.
It's just complete nonsense. And that's cultural Marxism, to reverse the meaning of languages so that people have got what's known as cognitive dissonance, the holding of two conflicting ideas in your head and trying to accommodate them both. It makes you, whilst you're doing that, incapable of sensible judgment. You can't actually exercise it. That's the whole purpose of it. So that you become a kind of prone idiot, just sat there lapping up this gobbledygook that they come out with. They've obviously struck gold with Keir Starmer because he's a man who can barely talk sense ever. I mean, it's just, he's remarkable, and he's impervious. His demeanor is one that makes him impervious to any criticism. It seems that he's absolutely impervious to it. One doesn't sense that he loses a wink of sleep over any of this kind of stuff because he is very robot-like. There's no two ways about it. He's a man lacking in charm or any political skill or sense. He's an ideologue of the worst type. He's actually, I don't know if you know, he's what's known as a Pabloist, which is an extreme Trotskyite. This is what he was at university. This is such a nonsense ideology based on fundamental flaws, in my view of thinking. Because the people that proposed communism, which is what we're living under right now, by the way, I would suggest, and people need to think of it like that, or a kind of sort of, pastiche of it. Communism is meant to be, or certainly in its early stages, was supposedly a healthy response to the rampant growth of capitalism. Capitalism was deemed to be a terrible thing. And after a certain point, it is. It is a certain thing, because now we end up with super capitalists, people that are dominating all these markets. For example, BlackRock have decided that British farmland is an undervalued asset and they're going to buy it. Who says? I never allowed them to buy it. They're not even an English corporation. Most of the people that live in that corporation are not English. They've got no cultural affinity with me. I don't hate them, but I hate their behavior in this regard, right? This is not on. This is my home. You don't get to do it. So we have although we know these things are instinctively right and that we should be able to protect hearth and home, all the sort of protections that we used to have going back even into the Middle Ages have slowly but surely been removed from us, so that we find that we're flailing around a bit going, how do we stop this disease coming into our space more fully every day, which it is, and destroying the very things that we love? I heard a woman the other week saying, I love this country, but I'm absolutely heartbroken at what's happening to it. Good. This is good. Everyone needs to be heartbroken. They need to be absolutely in tears about it. It's a start. They've got to feel it first. People have got to feel how bad this really is and stop intellectually dismissing it. Oh, it'll all sort itself out. It won't. It's not going to sort itself out. We are the ones that have got to smarten up, sharpen up, and find as civil a way as we can of rebuffing this, and also discovering, re-employing ways to protect ourselves against what is a completely hostile attack. I mean, what have we as the normal working class people of the earth done? Not much bad. I'm not aware of it. I'm sure we're stupid at times and have inadvertently done daft things. But I don't come from a family where anybody's in it who woke up one morning and said, I know, I'm going to declare war on another nation and I'm going to send loads of my own fellow men off to their death. I don't come from a line of people like that. Unfortunately, we've got people that do, and they seem to think this is a great family tradition. We must bang on with it. I mean, when they were talking about the Ukraine a couple of years ago, or even 6 months ago, to hear some of these military people talk, it's astonishing how foolish they are. They're foolish. They're like on autopilot. This is not about, oh, you're showing no courage. No, people can be tremendously courageous, but not for a false cause. And the Ukraine is a totally false cause. I don't wish any harm on the Ukrainian people, but yet again, that's been brought about by the fact that the Ukrainian leadership, so-called, is entirely corrupt and is responsible for bringing this upon themselves. And they're using it, are they not, to have many of the Ukrainian youth go into the military and just be blown apart. They're slaughtering their own people by the asinine nature of the way that they're dealing with it. And the other weird thing, of course, in that case, is that Ukraine really is part of Russia. It always has been.
I know. I was in Russia many years ago, and they referred to it as that part of Russia. And I think a lot of people now, because again of what we've been told through the news and not the telephone, the television and the newspapers, about naughty Russians and the communism and stuff like that, and how Putin is a bad guy. people haven't done the research to realize what's been going on in Ukraine for many, many years before what's happening
Hmm.
now. And
Yeah.
and again, that's ignorance. People need to, get their facts before they start judging anybody and saying he is the bad guy. I don't know if he's a good guy, I don't know if he's a bad guy, but get your facts right before you start saying, "Oh, bloody Putin, evil, evil, evil." It's very
Hmm.
sad, the ignorance that people have, actually, because they haven't done their homework, really. And when you mentioned BlackRock owning, buying up the farms, it just made me think about the conversation we were having before we started pressing the record button about farms. And you and I have seen the same footage of Katie Hopkins going around to a particular farm where all these solar panels, thousands of solar panels, are being laid out, because that's what you can do with your farmland now, can't you? They don't want you to have sheep and chickens and cows, but they do want you to have solar panels and glamping sites and everything else. But one hand they're putting the solar panels up, and then the other hand they're trying to dim the sun, which is just bizarre. I mean, it just beggars belief. So when you're talking about you've got to be affected
I
emotionally,
know.
energy, emotion, it has to affect you, doesn't it? So the farmers must, well, some of the farmers aren't going to be bothered, because they're going to get rich on the back of selling their land to, a solar panel company. But most of us have to be affected before we get up and do something. Otherwise, it's always, well, it's not bothering me, so I'm all right, mate. I'm all right. Yeah, I've still got a job.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I'd say it's you'd possibly say that that's what you would call short-term thinking, but it's short-term absence of thinking. No nation ever gets wealthy on bringing about conditions that harm its youth. You can't do it. It's absolutely impossible. So everybody's thinking of short-term gain. So they get more money to buy what exactly? And to live where exactly? In a place that they are playing an active role in making worse. So everybody, of course, has been trained to think, well, if I have £1 million, or if I can earn £1 million a week, and some people do, right? And if a guy that's earning 1 million a week needs 2 million a week, right? This orientation to more stuff.
yeah, greed.
The whole of the focus, there's literally no time in their day, I would suspect, where they consider things outside of that worldview. That has become their entire game, and they're good at it, but it's a game, and it's a game that's gone on way too long. It's so old, it's become decrepit and useless. It's of no use to us anymore. It's as if they don't recognize that we can actually solve all the problems. They're actively involved, whether they know it or not, in stopping the solutions to the problems coming into day-to-day life, because it would deny them, to paraphrase Churchill, their share of the profits. It's the profits that I need. For what? The profits for what? To buy more stuff that I don't need, to ruin more people's lives so that I can now earn 3 million a week, or whatever it is. It's a bizarre orientation, and it's literally being in the temple of Mammon. That's what whether they would think of it in that way or not doesn't matter. If you look at what they're doing, that's what this is all about. And we've got all these people that make piles of money held up as heroes of industry and stuff. It's a nonsense. Most people do not need anything like that amount of resource in life, because you haven't got a long enough life to use it all.
Yeah, how many islands can you own? You can
What's
only
the
put one
point?
foot on one island, exactly, or yachts. But so I think it's not just profit and money; it's power, isn't it? It's
Of course it
power,
is.
you
Yes.
know, and who's the most power? And I guess there's a bunch of them there competing at the top there. These aristocrats or the establishment, or everyone competing with. I've got more than you. So
Hmm.
yeah, but we're all being affected in the meantime. Paul, we've done nearly an hour. Is there something, because this has been a chit chat and it's been very interesting as usual. I learn a lot from you. Is there anything else you would want to add, talking about the title of this thing, VE Day, kind of
Well, I
following the
think it might
money?
be just worth very briefly looking at what
Mm.
these guys that fought in World War II, what they would have actually got if they were all still alive. So this is a litany of disasters, really. But what have they got if they were alive today? They've got a nation in which there is unbridled arrival from people who are culturally and racially incompatible with us. I don't dislike these people. It's simply you don't mix things together if you want to follow the laws of nature, because it creates so many other secondary and third level problems that are greater than the problem you're telling everybody you're about to solve. There's a knock-on effect that's far worse. So people are coming into this nation and they've got the vote. Why? I don't understand this. They're allowed to build their religious buildings in this nation. Why? What's the point of that? What's that? Somehow, so we defeated Germany for that to happen. We have a nation in which there is a never-ending, it would appear, attack upon young English girls by organized rape gangs, primarily, mainly Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. They have a government that won't address this problem, won't talk about it, can't talk about it. They would be living in a nation that has given up all its rights of autonomy to an organization called the European Union, which the British managed to get an expression in that they didn't want during the Brexit campaign, but which the current leadership now is working behind the back doors to negate and to draw us back into a space full of European bureaucrats, most of whom are also globalist, communist-minded oafs. The backbone and spine of us as a people is defined by who we are as a nation, that is, as a race, as a tribe of people of the same race with a shared and received history, culture, and language. That's what it is to be British. And it's the cards that we personally got dealt because that's what we are. And if I was French, I would have got those cards and so on and so forth. And so all of this, if you look at it, that century, much of it was to destroy the whole idea of nationhood in the minds of all the people. We don't need nations, they're saying. Nations are the problem. Nations are natural, they're organic, they work. They work better than anything else. I'm not saying they're flawless. That's not what anybody would say. But the lessons that you learn within them actually count, whereas these lessons are not lessons at all. It's just a complete mess. So it's, I don't think any of them would be happy. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but someone said, if you ask those guys if they'd go up the beaches at Normandy, if this is what was going to happen, would they go up the beach? What would their answer be? I don't think so. No, I don't think we'll bother with that. I think we'll let Germany win, you know. Win what exactly? The nation that didn't even want a war with us. So, and Churchill has been instrumental in that. Immediately after the war, he was involved in setting up all these, he was part of the United Nations, which is another joke. Since that came along, no nations have been united. You can't even unite them. It's a completely pointless exercise. Nations don't need to be united. They just need to cooperate nicely with one another, right? And we're making so much stuff. We make so many cars and trousers and everything. We could make so much stuff, but apparently there's always a problem with the economy. No, there isn't. There's never been a problem with the economy, but there is a massive problem with the banking system, which brings about this sense, this false sense of lack, or this surplus, or they must control this, or they must control that. They must just go away. We have to find a way to shut that institution down in its current form and replace it with the honorable banking structures which at some degree National Socialist Germany employed, which of course is a bit rich, isn't it? But they did. I'm not saying what they did was perfect. It was a bit of a hybrid as well. It's not as if there's one sort of stock solution to all of this, but the world is not a better place because of World War II. It is not. And,
it isn't. No, and can I add to your list? I just have to double check because I was talking to somebody the other day, said, no, that can't be right. And I thought, no, it can't be right. But there's MPs campaigning for an airport instead of putting it in Heathrow at our expense. Have you heard about this?
No, please.
Where do you think they want to put it?
An airport? Where do they want to put it? I don't know.
They don't want to put it in Heathrow at our expense. They want to put it in Pakistan.
Nice. That's good.
And I said, I thought it's a joke. I said, hang on a minute, this is Britain and our airports. Why should we not, if it's going to be expanded at Luton or Stansted or Heathrow or whatever? I don't know. I said, no, we don't want it in Heathrow. We want it in Pakistan to help. Yeah. So it's just the big.
It's
me,
madness.
I have to laugh. It is madness, and I have to. I laugh a lot.
It's traitorous behaviour. I can't. They are actively involved in behavior that is directly harming and impairing the quality of life and livelihoods of the people of this nation. There's a lot of people living on this island who rightfully should be living back at home.
Yes.
And who would be happier there. And it's not even, in many cases, it's not even their fault. The financial system and its agents can't wait. Brilliant. Right. Okay. Fantastic. I mean, these people haven't got anything to do with their life. It's anything to create a distraction as opposed to face the core the core issues. The core issues have to be resolved. And the English are kind of also, many English are kind of mealy mouthed about it as well. You can't be lukewarm on this topic. You've got to be clear about what works for people. And this would work for all people. I don't begrudge people wanting a better economic life, but it's not our
No,
job to provide it.
no, we can't solve everybody's
Because we're not
problems.
even
I know.
providing a decent economic life for our own people. I
No,
keep coming back to houses. Look at
yeah,
this thing that's happening with houses right now.
yeah,
So this is what this has won us as well. So young people can't buy a house, but if you're a migrant, you're going to get your rent paid free for 5 years. And Serco, that sick organization, right? It's sick, is quite happy to do this, and landlords will take the money. In other words, people are being put in a situation to behave in a way that's destroying their own people.
yes.
Going to destroy them. The landlords that do that are actively involved in destroying their own people and own way of life because they want some money. Because they want money. It really does come down to that.
It does.
It's the,
it does.
The money thing is it's the issue. Yeah, it's
Greed.
the type of money that we have. Yeah, the type of money causes aberrated behavior. We use a type of money called interest-bearing debt money. You can have different types. That's the one that we are compelled to use by the financial establishment. And it's a terrible type of money. And it's designed for control purposes. And that's what we're dealing with on the pragmatic level. So we need, and this is kind of echoing that chat we had the other day when we met up at the pub, when I was just talking about Hilaire Belloc and one of his observations about the crisis of civilization, that there are broadly speaking, there are 3 areas that we need to be aware of. There is the spiritual, there is the political, and there is the economic. Yeah. And in the normal state of affairs for healthy living, there has to be a spiritual regeneration of the people. And this is a commitment to the laws of God. I know that's a big topic as well, but let's just leave it there for now. These fundamental laws, which are the laws of nature. Nature evidences them all around us. It's about things like your kith and kin, looking after your fellow man, your neighbor, providing a good sense of livelihood and fair play amongst us, a moral and ethical people. So you need that to come about. And from that, once you've reestablished your connection with that, that then informs the political sphere, whose job is to build up the laws to bring that about. We go, this is how people naturally want to live. And we have had periods where this has happened. And then the political department dictates to the economic system. It says, this is how you will behave economically, because if you don't, you're going to impair the values that these people have about how they want to live. You're going to hurt their families. Right now, we live in a situation that's completely the other way around. The economic space dictates to politics, and politics is crushing the spiritual world. And we need a reverse of polarity. And it begins with us. Even though we are not directly responsible, we have to say we are, because now we can do something about it. And I don't view Churchill as a man that helped. Let's put it that way. I'm being very mild in my criticism. I don't think he helped at all. And it's just worth reminding that 80 years ago, it was great that the war ended. But as I said, it never should have happened in the first place. And he was tragically instrumental in bringing it about. He was a prime agent in that. I should have even read out the letter that Hermann Göring wrote to him a few hours before he killed himself. It's absolutely astonishingly brilliant in his withering criticism of what Churchill did. They knew that Churchill was not his own man either. People need to be aware of that. He was controlled by someone called Bernard Baruch, who was his handler, and other agents from a thing called, I think it was the Syndicate or something like that, I can't remember, that funded him throughout the 1930s when he was supposedly in the political wilderness. So anybody listening can tell I'm not a fan. And I hate to run counter to the mood of the country. He was a great orator. He said some brilliant and very funny things. No one can take that away from him. But unfortunately, he was batting for the wrong side. And many, many Englishmen and women and Germans died because of this man as one of the primary causes. People would say, you traitor, Paul, you've got it all wrong. It's Hitler that caused it all. I would just suggest that people need to look at both sides of the storybook. And unfortunately, the vast majority of people have only got one side currently.
And there are a lot of books out there that are telling the truth about Churchill. There's a lot of books, because I've read them and I've got them on my bookshelf, and I'm reading one now about about the British Empire and what we did and stuff like that.
Yep.
Which is a topic for another
He was
day.
nasty. He was
No,
nasty. He's quite
he
happy to
was
starve
nasty.
people to death.
Yeah,
He
Ireland. What
was,
happened in Ireland, and yeah,
yep,
all of it to control again. I mean, to control them. Yeah, but it's what we've not been taught, isn't it? We've been taught other things, and he's our hero and all that kind of stuff.
yep.
There was
Doesn't make you
something
very
else.
popular at parties, though.
Yeah, well, a good speaker like Hitler, a good speaker, very good orator, as you said.
He's
Um,
brilliant. Churchill's absolutely
mm.
brilliant. If you want to know how to use language, he's as good. He's tremendous. Yeah, he is. Unfortunately, it was employed for the wrong ends, I would suggest. But there we go.
Well, if you've got the letter, the Goring letter, could you maybe ping it over and I'll put it in the description if you've got easy access to it, because I'm sure people
Aye,
would
I'll
very
dig
much
it
like
up. I
to
think
read
there's a
that.
link to it somewhere. Yeah, it's quite an
Yeah, if
astonishing.
there is,
I meant to record it actually at one point, just as a
that's a
little
good idea. That,
thing. It's
yeah,
yeah,
to read it
yeah.
out. I think that would be a very good idea. But yeah,
It's one of these things that shifts your context very rapidly. It
right,
gives, even if people don't agree with much of what we've discussed here today or what I've said, that's fine. But they owe it to themselves to look at this stuff, because you can
yes,
read certain things and suddenly you go, actually, these people on the other side were human beings just like us. Yes. I've been led to believe that they were monsters. Some of them were. We had our own fair share of monsters too. Let's not forget that. But overall, you look at this and you go, the more you look at it, you go, this was a ridiculously, wholly avoidable conflict, which was brought about by other forces for their ends and not ours. We didn't win a thing. We won nothing. We won nothing. And in the process of it, effectively, Churchill lost all the resources of the empire, whatever you may think about that. And there's a lot of negative about it as well. But they were all basically picked up for a song by the so-called Americans. Not really the Americans, just the financial power base now sitting in America, which is where it had gone in great part because of the resources of that nation. So it's multi-layered, but broadly speaking, unfortunately, the English lads and lasses, and my dad was one of them. He was in the Navy. And I had some wonderful chats with him towards the end of his life. The last 5 or 6 years, he died when he was 90, but from about 85 onwards, we spoke regularly once a month on the phone, huge calls. And he wasn't an ardent supporter. I always remember whenever that cenotaph thing is on, November the 11th, when they all march, my dad would sometimes he'd stand in the room and look at it and he'd just go, blow a big
oh,
raspberry, right? And he'd go, for bloody what? Because he lost my, and that's not, no one knows that, but most ex-squaddies feel like that. They came back to nothing. They came back
yeah.
to nothing. This is not spoken about. Well, we won a war. Just focus on that all the time. I think not. I think not. This is a sordid thing. It's a terrible thing. And Christendom in Europe was struck a heavy blow from which it's probably never going to recover. We're on the fumes of Christianity, as it were. And I mean that in the best sense. I'm not talking about churches. I'm talking about working as a unified people, behaving well with a good moral and ethical standard. It's all in us now. It's our job to stoke those fires up and get it back, is my view.
Well, let's do it. Let's stoke those fires,
Let's,
Paul.
shall we?
Let's
Yeah,
do it.
let's do it,
Yeah,
Karen.
we can start by inviting other people to stoke their fires. That's all it takes. That's all it takes. Paul, I'm going to end it now because I think we've done the hour, and I know you and I can talk for, well, I can listen to you for a lot longer than that, but I think we'll save the rest for another day.
Lovely.
Thank you once again. You've been talking to Karen Dodd at Wise Women Weekdays, and if you like this information, then give it a like and maybe subscribe and maybe put some comments if you have questions for Paul. Put them down, or questions or comments or whatever your opinion is. It's a chit chat conversation. That's what it's all about. So thank you, Paul, very much, and I will see you no doubt very soon. And anything you want to say to close?
Just thank you, Karen. Thank you very much.
Absolute,
Great to talk
absolute
about this
pleasure.
stuff and to get behind the mic. I felt a bit rustier
Back.
today because we'd not
Yeah.
spoken for such a while,
No,
but
no.
it's
We've
been
had some
fun.
stuff going on. Super.
Yeah.
Always is. Thank you very much.
Thank